So the last thing we were talking about, we were discussing I love you is a lie. So if I love you is a lie, isn't this the foundation of Christianity? So many people will say, Jesus loves you or God loves you. Well, I don't know if it ever says that in the Bible, but it does say that God is love. But they'll say it's all about a relationship. It's all about relationship with Jesus. Or it's all about relationship with God. But we were discussing that relationships exist in the imagination. Also, if everything is one, then how could there be a relationship? But before we discuss that idea, I want to ask you about the whole idea of rituals. So, you would discuss that when you're doing a ritual, it's not in order to please God, but you're doing it in order to break out of your habits. And can you discuss what the purpose of the rituals are? And for instance, I'll just ask one example, and then I'm going to ask you another question in regards to the Bible. But one example was the Hare Krishna chanting. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Hare, Hare. They chant that. That's a ritual. So, what is the purpose behind rituals? Can you explain this, Gary?
Well, again, that's another good question. It goes back to the hierarchy of waking up. We talked some in an earlier video about the hierarchy of growing up from from uh, predator and prey, etc. But there's also a hierarchy in waking up. See, humanity first, it would appear, first um, came up with the assumption or the impression that there was a magical being somewhere out beyond us that was the chief operating officer and did whatever he or she pleased, and we had no say in the matter. We were just pawns in this arrangement of the magician separate from us who operated us according to his own will and his own good pleasure. And then slowly humanity began to question whether or not that was the truth. And they begin to realize maybe there is something we can do. Maybe we're not just helpless pawns and moved about on the checkerboard, on the chessboard of life by an autonomous impersonal being. Maybe there's something we can do to influence this magical being, this magician in the sky. And that's when superstition began to develop. So there began to be this idea that if I do certain things and I don't do certain things, that can influence this impersonal, absent God to do something in my favor. Or if I don't do them, then that'll influence God to do something to punish me or judge me. So that was the second step in the hierarchy of our understanding of the operating system, how the world operates. See, the growing up is what I call your application software, and this is your operating system. How does the world operate? So the second one is on a superstitious level. Then slowly, humanity began to awaken to the realization that maybe that was limited also. Maybe that wasn't really an accurate understanding of how the world operates. Maybe um, it's not that the superstition influences God, it's that our behavior brings us closer into alignment with the way God is always operating. So instead of doing something to influence God to our benefit, we do something to ourselves in order to get into harmony with what God is always doing. And that's what ritual is. It's a way of getting unhooked from the stuff that's leading down a dead end street and participating in something that gets me closer to being in the flow, closer to being aligned with the order we depend on. And that's what I understand ritual to be. It's not something to influence God as superstition is. It's something to influence us to alter our way of being so that we're more free to benefit from the flow. And then people began to see that the ritual somehow worked, and then they could even think they could go back to thinking that was because superstition, or they could move forward to trying to understand, well, now, how does that work? How do I understand that I'm getting more in harmony? And that's when humanity began to come up with myths to try to explain something that was totally beyond the reach of mere logical and rational explanations. So that's what myth is. So there was a mythological, by memorizing or listening to and contemplating certain myths, then not only did our behavior get more aligned with, but also our understanding became more in line with the order we depend on. And then eventually we moved to the fifth level, where we began to become more rationally oriented. We could use our scientific inquiry and go beyond simple mythological explanation for how the world operates, and we came up with scientific rational explanations for how the world operates. And now we've begun to realize that that too is limited, even though it's a step beyond, it's limited. Maybe there is a higher or more inclusive and a more comprehensive understanding. And that's when we began to move into intuitive thinking. That I guess that's enough of that, because it's harder to explain once you go beyond rational thinking. And basically it's saying the world is operating. We have the capacity to become aware of how the world is operating, and we have the capacity to align ourselves more in harmony with it, and therefore increasing the probability of falling and being caught up in the flow.
Any other thoughts on that, Grandpa?
No.
So I was gonna go in one direction with that, but I'm thinking I'm gonna go a different direction. So can you just explain the Garden of Eden story where Adam and Eve are naming the animals and what this represents?
See, in our expanding, as a child, for example, begins to learn to talk, begins to put words on things. And earlier, a child, before they really learn to speak, they can say mama and dada, but they really aren't identifying mom and dad with those words. That's just something that they're saying. They're more in line with who mom and dad are, and they're not. They're aware. They know mom and dad not by name, but by the quality of their presence and participation in life. But slowly, we start, instead of encouraging our to become aware of things and to appreciate things, the temptation is to start training the child to name them. So then when you become busy at naming something, then you don't have as much attention left over to just appreciate something. You become more interested in naming and explaining and categorizing rather than appreciating. And it would appear that that's what the whole Garden of Eden story is all about. That as we eat from the tree of knowledge, as a child eats from the tree of knowledge and learns certain explanations, we become more interested in the names or the explanations or the descriptions rather than in appreciating the reality of something.
So is that the relationship between awareness and intuition and the rational? So the names and everything, that's our rational explanations, but then there's something beyond that?
Yes.
And that was the original. When they're originally in the Garden of Eden, What, aren't they just pure awareness, or they're the flow, right?
Yeah, that's apparently what that poetic story of the Garden of Eden is all about. It's a poetic description of what it means to be in the flow.
But then they start to name things. Okay, so now I remember just an example would be, okay, let's say that you want to label somebody as this person is uh, bipolar.
Yeah,
Now you don't have any opportunity to see what the person is or to understand the person, or like you already have your stories about.
yeah,
So then you prejudge.
yeah. You've got them labeled, prejudged, and so therefore you don't meet the individual. You meet your name, the name that you've put on them, the stereotype that you've tacked onto them, on top of them.
So, but the thing is, okay, I name this bird this, but it's a fact. When I see a seagull, okay, it's a seagull. But there are stereotypes of seagulls. Seagulls make this noise. They all kind of look alike. They all kind of do the same thing. They're flying around. They're near the ocean. Things have names, and the names, they it's true. But you're saying everything is one, and now we're creating division and everything. But
Well, I was watching a nature program last night, and they had a video of a flock of seagull of not pelicans flying in formation, and rather than thinking of them as pelicans, I had that moment of awareness of the beauty of that particular configuration, of that particular dance that they were in. So rather than naming them and calling them pelicans, I was just aware of the beauty and the harmony and the perfection of their flight. So that the name and the description didn't get in the way of an appreciation for their dance. Same way with the human being. See, we are the dance. We are not as we appear to be. We are the dance. I'm not Bob Merkel. I'm the dance.
is this related to Shiva's dance?
Probably. I don't understand. I'm not that well versed.
So here's the thing, Grandpa. Okay, Moses in the burning bush. I remember you called it non-simultaneous, partially overlapping flashes of light.
Yeah. Yeah. What Moses became aware of, he'd been out on the mountainside, probably gazing at the moon, and he happened to look over and he saw this burning bush, or he became aware of what Bucky Fuller called the non-simultaneous, partially overlapping energy events, just like the picture on our video screen here. These are energy events, and they're not simultaneous. They're happening at different spaces in time, and because they partially overlap, they give the appearance of being solid. But what Moses was aware of was love, of light, of perfection, of beauty. He didn't name it as a bush. He didn't get stuck in, that's a bush. No, he saw, wow, that's an expression of a non-simultaneous, partially overlapping energy event. But he didn't even name that. But that's what he was aware of. Just like I was aware of the pelicans flying.
So if you don't name anything, then what is it?
Well, no, it serves a useful function. Children need to learn how to name things. That's all a part of growing up. But eventually, we benefit from letting go of our names, that we've affixed things in order to see them for what they really are. For we're not as we appear to be.
So that's the flow when you move beyond it?
Yes, exactly.
So is that a more enriched state than Adam and Eve originally in the garden? Well, or is it the same as they're here?
Yeah, it would appear that symbolically or poetically it's the same. There's here. See, we're all born into that space, into that timeless moment of oneness. But apparently whether we need to or not, it would appear that the way things operate is we fall out of that awareness and then need to go through the process of reawakening to it.
I remember you would talk about oceanic consciousness, and the baby is born into oceanic consciousness where he sees himself as one with the mother. And
Yeah, well, the child doesn't have the capacity to articulate that experience, but apparently just participates in it non-consciously, and there's no conscious awareness of it. But it would appear that, like Moses or in the Mount of Transfiguration, there is an awareness of oneness, which isn't available. We don't know for sure, but apparently isn't available to the infant. And that's what's been called oceanic consciousness.
wait, the child does have an awareness of oneness.
No, apparently they don't have.
So what do they have?
Well, we don't know for sure.
Oh. What is oceanic consciousness?
Well, that's a sense of. It's hard to explain. It just, in my understanding, it's just that the child is participating in this state of this eternal moment of oneness, but is not conscious of it. So that's the reason it's called oceanic consciousness. It's a nondescript, non-discernible, non-conscious.
So it's not conscious of it. So is that like the Garden of Eden, maybe?
Yeah, maybe. See, we don't know. But obviously that story, that myth, has persisted because it taps into some level of understanding that's available to all of us intuitively.
So the baby feels that it's one with the mother. It doesn't have any distinction between itself and the mother.
Right.
Do you want to talk about ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny?
Maybe on another video. This one's kind of long.